I drove 4 hours into the hill country to ask one question, and I came home without an answer, and I have decided that is the last time I will go looking for one. The question was simple enough on paper. In the autumn of 1987, a federally funded listening station called the Aldermore Array, built into a fold of the Cumbrian Hills to catalog background radio noise from the galactic disk, shut down in the space of 9 days. 11 staff were reassigned without explanation. The official record blames a lightning strike that fried the receiver array beyond repair. I had a photograph from a local paper showing the dish 3 weeks after that strike, undamaged, still turning. I had a redacted budget line that kept funding a facility the government insisted no longer functioned. And I had one name nobody at the agency would confirm or deny. Lucia Marsh, station engineer. Last known address: a stone cottage 40 minutes past where my phone stopped finding signal. She was 81, and she let me in because, she said, she was tired of being the only one who remembered it correctly. She told me before I sat down that she had tried twice before to talk to people like me. Once to a regional paper in 1994, once to a man writing a book on the array's funding history in 2009, and both times the conversation had simply stopped existing afterward. No retraction printed, no denial issued. The journalist from 1994 told her years later he had no memory of the call at all, though his own notebook, which he still owned, carried her name and 3 pages of his own shorthand. She did not expect I would fare any differently. She wanted to talk anyway. At her age, she said, being believed had stopped mattering more to her than being heard. She told it slowly. The way you tell something you have rehearsed in your head so many times, the rehearsal has worn smoother than the memory. The array's job, she said, was never glamorous. Catalog the noise, flag anything that repeated. Most of what repeats is pulsars, satellites, our own equipment talking to itself. In 6 years they had flagged 400 and some candidates and ruled out every one. The 401st did not rule out. It came in on the night of October the 11th, on a band the equipment wasn't built to expect, and it did not behave like noise. It had structure, cadence. A junior tech named Ellard ran it through every decryption routine they owned and got nothing, because, Marsh said, and her hands were very still when she said it wasn't encrypted. It was just old. Old in a way that took her weeks to understand, because the signal kept recurring in different forms, as if it had been translated and retranslated and rebroadcast across a span of time that made the array's own 30-year service life look like a held breath. 4 distinct linguistic structures, layered, the way sediment layers. The newest layer was still older than anything in any catalog she had access to. She remembered the week they tried to date the oldest layer by comparing its decay against the other 3, the way you'd estimate a building's age from how many coats of paint it had taken. Ellard worked the math twice, got the same answer twice, and then asked permission to stop working on it, which she granted without asking why. Years afterward, she understood that he hadn't been frightened of the number. He'd been frightened of how confidently the equipment had produced it. She didn't know what it said. Nobody at Aldermore ever fully decoded it. But 2 things became clear by the 2nd week, and she told me both of them without flinching, because she had clearly decided a long time ago that flinching would not change either fact. The first was the shape of the message. It repeated on a fixed interval, aimed outward, not at Earth. Earth sat almost incidentally inside its cone, the way a lighthouse beam happens to cross a reef on its way to open water. It was not talking to us. It was talking past us, to something else, about us. The clearest fragment they ever isolated, run through enough passes to be confident of the translation, rendered as 4 words, repeated at the head of every layer like a header on a letter. Do not approach Earth. The second thing was the interval. The signal repeated once a year, always within the same 11-day window, and when Ellard backtracked the array's own 30 years of raw archived noise nobody had ever bothered to review because it had never before been flagged as a candidate, he found the same signal, fainter, buried under instrument drift, going back as far as the tapes went. It had been arriving every year since before the array existed to hear it, before the dish was poured in concrete, before, Marsh said, anyone now living had been born to wonder about it. Command arrived on the 9th day. In not local oversight, 3 men she had never seen before and never saw again, who reviewed 6 years of logs in an afternoon, told the staff the array had been struck by lightning, and gave everyone new postings within the week. Marsh went to a weather station in Orkney. Ellard, she heard later, took a teaching post, and never spoke of Aldermore to anyone she knew of. A third colleague, a records clerk named Priya Oduya, who had typed up every transcript Marsh ever filed, emigrated within the year and stopped answering letters. Marsh tracked down an obituary for her decades later, 4 lines long, that mentioned nothing of Aldermore at all, as if the woman had lived an entirely separate life that simply happened to share her name. Marsh kept one thing of her own, a single page of handwritten notes, folded into a book of poetry, which she had decided, 37 years ago, no search would ever think to open. I asked her the only question that mattered. Why hide a warning meant to protect us? She looked at me for a long moment. The way you look at someone you've decided is finally old enough to be told something. It was never a warning meant for us, she said. We just happened to be standing close enough to overhear it. And once you understand that, the next question isn't why they hid it, it's why they let the dish keep turning. I didn't understand what she meant until I drove past the station itself on the way back, on a hunch, half a mile off the marked road. The fence was down in 3 places and the access road had gone to gorse. The concrete pad cracked enough that grass had found its way up through the seams in a pattern that looked almost deliberate, like the ground itself had been left alone long enough to grow over its own scar tissue. The dish was still there under 30 years of weathered tarp, lashed down in places and torn loose in others, and it was not still. It moved in slow, patient degrees, tracking something across a sky empty of anything I could name, powered by a feeder line that, according to the regional utility map I checked the next morning, terminates at a facility that was decommissioned in 1987 and officially draws no current. I stood at the fence line for the better part of an hour, and the dish completed perhaps 4 degrees of arc in that time, unhurried, the way a thing moves when it has never once in its working life had a reason to hurry. I have the photograph. I have Marcia's page, which she gave me, saying she didn't want it in the house anymore. I have, if I wanted it, a very good story. I am not going to write it as that story. I sat in my car at the bottom of that hill for a long time, watching a dish that should be dead keep its 37th year of an appointment nobody renewed, and I understood, the way you understand weather before it arrives, that the silence around Aldermore was never a cover-up in the way I'd been trained to hunt for one. It was maintenance. Somebody, a long time ago, decided that the safest thing for everyone standing inside that reef was to let the lighthouse keep turning, and never explain to the fish why the water stayed calm. I called my editor and told her there was nothing at Aldermore worth the page count. She didn't believe me. I let her not believe me. What I keep, instead of a byline, is this. Every October, in an 11-day window I now have marked on my own calendar, I drive up that gorse road and park where the fence is down, and I watch a dead station listen to something none of us were ever meant to overhear, and I do not climb the hill, and I do not knock on the housing, and I do not ask it to explain itself. I have come to think that not asking is the only answer it was ever offering anyone the courtesy of receiving.